Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at Qapu Khalqi, a Haqqislam sectorial who plays very different to its other brothers within faction. Where a lot of the other Haqqislam sectorials really focus on a camo game, some kind of shell game, hidden deployment, Qapu Khalqi's trickery goes in a very different direction, and in a very fun direction, where you're focusing more on smaller, more efficient link teams that can put up some pretty significant firepower. You've got some pretty unique tools in the faction, like white noise and drop troops like Yuan Yuans and Bashi bazooks that make you able to engage with your opponent in much more varied ways with much more varied vectors than a traditional Haqqislam army can do. They're very different, but very, very fun, and I think they're a faction that draws a lot of people in based on just how exhilarating it can be to play Qapu Khalqi. Now, before we jump in, be sure to also check out Rob's recent Qapu Khalqi Faction Focus for some deeper and likely better thoughts on the sectorial. But be sure to finish this one off first, and then go and eat your vegetables by watching Rob's video. It's just linked down in the description. So, what defines Qapu Khalqi? Qapu Khalqi has very efficient and flexible fire teams. In a kind of modern meta where duos are very, very important, Qapu Khalqi's whole fireteam chart is really based around duos and making very effective duos. One of their key units, the Hafza, has, I think, about 4 keywords, which means it as a unit interacts very well with the fire teams at large. Qapu Khalqi also gets 2 Haris teams, which, while not necessarily as impactful as it was in N4, is still a really nice thing to have and can lead to really unique builds and combinations of models. They've got quite a high standard of gunfighting for Haqqislam, not only being able to make those shots initially, but also in terms of AP and actually trying to melt something to the ground. This is really exemplified in units like Janiseries, where the faction can make very, very cheap fire teams involving Janiseries, where other factions are spending much more to do so. And that's a bit of a pattern throughout Qapu Khalqi as well, where you're paying generally a slightly lower cost to get an outcome than a lot of other factions would do. But then for gunfighting, you've also got very good aggressive MSV2, as well as some good anti-armor pieces as well. While you've got these really nice guns, you've also got these different vectors for engaging your opponent with a lot of parachutist and quite a good guided strategy as well, if you want to include that. Qapu Khalqi also has the potential to put a large amount of mines and deployables out in the field as well, which makes them a pretty fun army just to be able to shoot whatever you want out there, be able to engage how your opponent how you want, and in some ways they're a bit similar to Corregidor in the way they can kind of rock, paper, scissors and choose how they want to do that engagement. They do have a few drawbacks though. They've generally got quite a poor close assault game. They've really only got Yuan Yuans in terms of Croziers in terms of CC units who aren't particularly good. And then past that, you're really relying on some other parachutists to do some damage up close, or heavy infantry with shotguns. So you don't really have those good units who can run into an objective room or run into a deployment zone and really go crazy with a sword or anything like that. They're also generally quite a slow sectorial. You've got very little in the ways of super jump or in movement that's not just 4-4. So you really need to be focusing down on those quicker pieces if you have very mobility-based tournaments or mobility-based missions that you're aiming to conquer with Qapu Khalqi. In terms of defining units, Laxmi has been a recent pickup for Qapu Khalqi and brings a hacking device plus with pictures, which means that Qapu Khalqi now has white noise, which is a very special tool for Qapu Khalqi that the other Haqqislam sectorials don't gain access to, and that means that Qapu Khalqi can kind of get an edge up in those gunfights against particular units. You've also got Djanbazans, as mentioned before, who carry that MSV2 and, through smoke, are able to really get quite good odds on units that, again, other units in the other Haqqislam sectorials may not be able to do. Yuan Yuans are pretty key to the strategy, as they're your war bands and also drop troops as well. You can take up to 3 of them, in Qapu Khalqi, and I have taken all three before to quite good effect, but they're a key unit in that they serve multiple roles within the faction, and are also just very fun to use. And then speaking of fun to use, sort of the poster boy of Qapu Khalqi is the Azra'il, with his continuous +1 continuous damage across all of his weapons, whether it's the AP HMG, the Feuerbach, the chain rifle, the AP heavy pistol. He's known to be a very deadly unit so long as he can connect, and we'll explore him a bit later. So, some notable changes from N4 to N5. The duo bonus has greatly aided the way Qapu Khalqi can build lists, with one exception, and we'll talk about that one exception when we get in the sectorial review proper. But essentially, the way Qapu Khalqi is set up in the fireteam chart, they can very easily jam two units together and get a very flexible, powerful, and efficient fireteam with not many slots or points really used. So the whole duo meta very much has aided Qapu Khalqi in the way it can set up its lists. And really, if you want to, excluding maybe your Yuan Yuans, you can have a QK list where every unit is reasonably linked and is doing quite well being in said link. The addition of Laxmi, as I mentioned, it's revolutionized the faction. Having that white noise is a great step. And then everything getting cheaper has sort of had a disproportionately beneficial effect on Qapu Khalqi, because everything being that just a little bit cheaper means you can fit in more duos, more Haris teams, and really kind of get the maximum out of that efficiency. The reduction of Sixth Sense is also very beneficial to Qapu Khalqi, where their smoke shooting is a lot more reliable, and white noise shooting can be very rarely resisted. But your active guided play is a little bit worse than it otherwise would be, and some of your pitchers are worse than they were in N4 as well. And it is important to note, though, that pitchers do have a better range band, and you do have access to X-Visor pitchers. Moving on to the structure of a Qapu Khalqi list, usually you're going to have an allotment for your irregulars and off-the-table troops. 2 is quite safe, 3 is sort of pushing it a little bit, and 4 is hard, but genuinely very doable in Qapu Khalqi. You're usually picking between Yuan Yuans, who are your AVA3 warbands, and you'll quite often be taking at least 2 of those. I'd consider 2 of them sort of the minimum in a list. Bashi bazooks, who have a number of very good aggressive profiles, and who sort of shore up your close assault deficit, and have a ton of utility with Hollow Mask and Hollow Echo that we'll talk a bit more about later as well. And then finally, Corsans do have a deployment zone DZ profile, which, if nothing else, can put your opponent on edge. And usually you can run, I'd say, about up to 4 of these collected profiles. I think 5 is probably pushing it too far, but I think I have seen a Qapu Khalqi list that has run many irregular and off-the-table orders and has done quite well for itself. And, this is to say, these drop troops sort of have a compounding effect on each other, because they're all so cheap. I mean, the Corsan's the most expensive at 21 points. They're also cheap that each one you send through, it's going to get easier and easier as each drop troop before it kind of makes more and more way for the next one. In terms of your link teams, you're usually going to have a Djanbazan duo for MSV shooting, where you can usually take a sniper and a heavy machine gun, which will do you quite well both on active and reactive. You can also just take a Hafza and any model that it shares a keyword with, whether that be a Janissary and you can slap a Forward Observer Hafza on there, whether it be an Odalisque or Laxmi, you can slap a Hafza on there, Sekbon, slap a Hafza on there, it doesn't matter. Then Haris teams, they're usually being built to provide a special die to a pitcher, or buffing up a gun that doesn't have a keyword. A good example of this might be the Azra'il, who, while being a very good gun, doesn't have the keyword just to make a quick duo happen, or with the Druze, where you don't necessarily want to take 2 of them. In terms of your cores, you're not really running cores in Qapu Khalqi. You can run a Ghulam core in a pinch, if you very much just want, the bits of utility you get from there. But I'd say it's outside of maybe the Hacker or the +1 command token Lieutenant, you're not really looking at Ghulams, but you can still build some nice Haris teams off of that base where you've got some keywords again. And then the kind of the more interesting thing for me is that Janissary cores aren't really out of reach, where your Hafsas do have those keywords. You can be taking a missile launcher, a heavy machine gun, then a couple Hafsas, and some kind of hacker, and that'll be a really nice core and a very strong core shooting at BS-15. And then you've got some solo pieces as well, with units like Samsa and Fiddler, who are really your only fast specialists in the factions. And then also your suite of tags, who are very well supported and fit very well into Qapu Khalqi. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at Infinity Army. Alright, and here we are in Infinity Army 7 with the Qapu Khalqi fireteams chart. As you can see, we've got unlimited duos, 2 Haris teams, and a core. Your first fireteam here will be the Ghulam fireteam, which, while you may initially think this is one of your primary fireteams, in Qapu Khalqi really it's not, but it's still something that's nice to have. You need a Ghulam, and you can include Aquasils, Odalisks, Sekban, and then any wild cards as well. I very rarely use this to actually build a core, but I do sometimes if I want a +1 command token Ghulam, for example. But there are some nice wild cards that can go into here to cut quickly down to the wild cards. You've got Hafsa who count as Ghulam, Layla Sharif counts as a Ghulam, so you can very easily get, say a Ghulam Doctor, Layla Sharif, and then something else on top of that. That's not a bad Haris at all. But the real money is down here in the Qapu Khalqi fire teams, where they can be a duo, a Haris, or a core. So you need any of an Odalisque, a Sekban, Djanbazan, or Azra'il to form this fire team. And there you can see the Odalisque and the Sekban share the Qapu Khalqi tag. There's no one else sharing those tags in this list down here. But again, if we go down to the wild cards, Hafsas count as Odalisque, Sekban, and Janiseries. You've also got Burkut, who count as Sekban, and Lakshmi, who counts as an Odalisque. So really, when you look at this Qapu Khalqi fire teams, you can really do quite a lot with it. Now, the most popular ways I like to do this is get an Azra'il, get Lakshmi, who counts as an Odalisque, and then a Hafsa, who counts as an Odalisque, and that's a very nice little Haris team. You can just slap 2 Djanbazans together in a duo, which I quite like to do. You could take, say, a Sekban Doctor with a Burkut light rocket launcher for a very resilient little duo that can go around and have a bit of fun. But there's really quite a lot you can do with these teams. You've also got the Rafiq remote who can plot around with the team, and that's pretty fun. But really mixing and mashing these units here with some of those wild cards, that's really where Qapu Khalqi sort of comes into its own and is very special. Then we've got the Zulu fire teams, which are essentially your armored fire teams that require a Shikush, Trip Hammer, Iguana, Scarface, specifically loadout Alpha, or Cordelia to form. And then a Rafiq, these units can join on that too. Usually you're just using this to either strap a specialist to an Iguana, or do something funky with tags if you want to. I mean, you can strap 2 trip hammers together to make a pure duo there. That's something that's a bit of fun in Druze that you can bring to here as well. Then you've got the Janiseries fire team, which is essentially how you get your linked guns with the Janissary. As you saw before, the Hafsa has the Janissary tag, so it can join on to a Janissary to get that duo bonus up and running. So you could really do something like Janissary, Hafsa, Forward Observer, and then Wild Bill, and that's a very good and very functional Haris team. You've got the Druze teams next, and they're the ones who really suffered with the changes kind of from N4 to N5, or essentially to get a duo bonus onto a Druze, you either need to take 2 Druze, which you don't necessarily want to do, you have to take Arslan, which you also don't necessarily want to do, or then you take a Hafsa and a Burkut, which, while fine, is quite expensive just to get a picture on that Druze. But it's not necessarily bad. It's just, it doesn't feel fantastic. Then Kaplans, they're another sort of weird little unit, but again, with how good your wild cards are, you can usually make something work there. And going on to the wild cards, Hafsas and Burkuts are the main ones, but Lakshmi and Layla Sharif are really there where you can kind of glue them onto anything to start building your network. And then Khorsans and Rahuni, I'm not finding myself using them as much, but we'll get to that as we go. Alright, so first up, the Humble Ghulam. Again, you're not really that interested in Gulam in Qapu Khalqi, you're really only interested for, say, the doctor, potentially the hacker, and then if you're really wanting that +1 command token lieutenant, the NCO grenade launcher, which is a favorite in other sectorials, doesn't really have as much of a place in Qapu Khalqi, where Yuan Yuans give you quite good smoke. And if you are wanting that true grenade launcher, you've got a better unit for that. And if you just want an NCO, you've got a better unit for that as well. So the Gulam grenade launcher, not really as used, and neither are Gulams as a whole. And you've got a little weird thing here with the Corregidor Alguacils. This is very much a legacy holdover. You should never take a Corregidor Alguacil. You have no reason to ever take a Corregidor Alguacil. The next up, we've got Odalisks. These guys are one of your Link Soup models and are more of a defensive piece. Really, you're looking at them for a +1 burst flash pulse with some, pretty nice weapons in terms of pulsars for a template. If something runs into CC with them, that's kind of bringing it down to a coin flip. And they're sort of tough, but really they're not doing an incredible amount for you. In terms of what profiles I'd look to take if you just really want to play an Odalisque, I like the Flash Pulse just because of the Whip 14. It's quite a good little defensive piece with that Shock Immune, No Handicap, Sixth Sense, and Combat Instinct. I'm also a fan of the Contender as well. I'm not really into spending Swick on a Spitfire, though Qapu Khalqi is not a Swick-intensive faction. I'm much more looking at the Contender here, just because, again, Odalisque's not exactly the bee's knees. Then we get to the Hafza unit, and this is the start of what makes Qapu Khalqi really quite good, and where you should consider them more as your kind of base line troop. So, looking at the Hafza, you've got a few profiles here, with the standouts and the workhorses really being that chain of command, the FO, and the lieutenant. The lieutenant is going to be your lieutenant most of the time. You don't really have sort of aggressive lieutenants who you'd rather take, and usually it's easier to fit these guys in terms of slot compression and efficiency over a Gulam lieutenant. You'll occasionally take the chain of command, just if you're a little bit worried about your Hafsa lieutenant, or if you did want to take one of the other lieutenants, like Arslan if you were crazy or something. And then the forward observer is just a very cheap profile to whack on the back of a Link team that otherwise maybe wouldn't have any kind of specialist, so that's quite nice. The Spitfire, I'm not so big on, but the heavy rocket launcher honestly is pretty decent, especially if you sort of if you do want to build out a Gulam core. Having a heavy rocket launcher, bump it up to BS-13. Maybe you disguise it as a Gulam missile launcher. Your opponent thinks they've gotten under you, then no, you surprise them with the HRL. That's something you can do. And because I didn't make it clear, the big thing here is Hollow Mask. So this is where your trickery really comes from in Qapu Khalqi. Because when you deploy, anything you deploy that's S2 could be a Hafsa. So you can present quite scary units. One that I like to present quite a lot is a Mobile Brigada Hacker, who's really just a Hafsa, linked in with other units like Laxmi or Layla, and that's really going to disincentivize someone from trying to throw a pitcher down and enter your network. Otherwise, you can, make them look like much scarier guns or reconstitutive specialists. That means your opponent might look at it and go, they've got a doctor there, they've got an engineer there, I don't want to put in all that work. And then, of course, you can disguise AROs and guns as well. It's also good to note with the forward observer, just, Whip 14 burst 2 flash pulse, pretty nice on a hollow mask. If you do kind of bluff out a longer range that someone tries to sneak under, that's probably a little more risky, but there's lots you can do with the Hafsas. So next up, the Corsans. These guys are pretty unique as some of your only quote-unquote fast units with move 6-2, as well as really being your only unit that you maybe feel okay going into CC with. You don't have any bonus dice, you don't have any martial arts, you just have CC attack -3, which is marginally better than what the Yuan Yuan's swinging, and you've only got a shock CC weapon. But what you do have instead is you've got +1 burst chain rifles as a quite nice profile. The drop bears profile is quite nice as well. And I'm never going to say no to grenades, you know me. So those are 3 decent profiles. And really, if you've got a little duo that you expect to move up the board, you can just chuck a Corsan on the end of that and kind of have that be the point of the spear to go around corners or just be a pain to whatever comes across you. The BS attack -3 is nice, but then outside of the FTO options, the real star of the show is the Corsan parachutist deployment zone with boarding shotgun, who suddenly makes that BS attack -3 very, very dangerous in the face of being shot in the back or out of line of sight, or just being able to walk into ARO pieces. So this is really where the Corsan more shines, is in the parachutist deployment zone. And it's not something you take every game. I think in a lot of ways, Bashi bazooks are better than Corsans, but even just that threat of having that Corsan is going to put mental load on your opponent. It's going to make them want to turn around those some of those pieces in their DZ, and if they're not prepared for it, well, then sometimes it might just be there. So the Corsan, it's a nice little piece. It's not as sort of popular or faction defining as you might think just by looking at it, but it definitely has its place in Qapu Khalqi. Next up, the engineers. You will take them. You can run 2 TR bots in Qapu Khalqi, which is a very nice plug-and-play sort of defensive setup that's quite easy to put together and also to maintain as well. Important to note with these engineers, they don't have deactivators, which I've found to be a little disappointing in games I've played with them, and it's really not worth taking their turret. Being a rifle and not a combi rifle, you can get caught in bad ranges. Really not great. All right, the Sword Pilot of Allah, just a pretty standard tag com unit. You can take it if you're taking Scarface or a more aggressive tag. Otherwise, I sort of wouldn't bother. And they're not really bringing anything fun or extra to the table, like, say, the Gator Pilot or the Salamander Pilot from Nomads. Then we get to Laxmi, and she's a very big deal. So she's Hacking Device Plus, upgrade Fairy Dust, which is actually quite nice, and Whip 14. Mimneg 3, which can lead to some annoying shootouts, and then Mine Layer with Cyber Mines. And Cyber Mines are a really, really great mine to be putting out there. Unlike an EM mine that kind of doesn't do anything against Warhorse, a Cyber Mine hits everything, and also it's a reset against a Cyber Mine and not a dodge, so you can set up some quite nasty forks, or end up having someone go in, taking a Cyber Mine hit, who was expecting to be able to dodge quite well out of a mine. So, of course, her main role is just to be setting up white noise, as well as being a Whip 14 hacker. And she's got a couple of pretty nice kind of profiles she can throw white noise over, and you can usually slap her in a fire team that contains that gun you want to put the white noise on. So if you've got an Azra'il or a Janissary, you can always slap Laxmi on the back of that. She can provide fairy dust to those units, and then also provide them white noise for the active turn as well. So she's really great. She synergizes really well with a lot of what QK wants to do, and I think honestly she is one of the staples in a list. I think every list should probably have Laxmi. Next up, Wild Bill. Bit of an unfortunate character. Marksmanship with BS13 will never not be good. A contender is quite good. Same with, I mean, honestly, a +1 damage rifle and multi-pistols. But he just doesn't really fit in an incredible amount. You can only take him in Janissary and Kaplan teams. And, while he can fit decently in a Janissary team, you're never really going to take him in a Kaplan team because you don't have a cheap way to get a bonus on to kind of round out a Haris team. But he's good. He's just a very awkward fit. But yeah, I could see him in a Haris if you take, Janissary HMG, Wild Bill, Rifle, or Contender, and then a Hafza, just Forward Observer to get a specialist in there. But yeah, he's okay. Now, another really big part of your hacking network is Layla Sharif. Really because of that combat instinct, means that she can see through stealth. So in most Qapu Khalqi lists, if you're planning to be in the hacking game at all, you probably want to take both Laxmi and Layla. And then if you take another killer hacker or another regular hacker, you've suddenly got a very robust hacking network just off the back of these three hackers. So having a killer hacking device with Carbonite means that with that combat instinct, she can threaten a mobility kill on a heavy infantry or tag, even if they have stealth, which is especially important in a season with stealth ops. Having just a spare EM mine and a BS-12 shock marksman can make some things happen on turn 3. I've really surprised myself in how often I've sort of gone, okay, it's turn 3, I just need something to die here. The main gun in the link has gone down. Okay, let's send in Layla, and she's managed to get a result. So Layla, also one of, I think, the kind of higher picks in the faction. I would I say auto take along with Laxmi? Not quite, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I would. I think she is that same caliber with Laxmi, especially being so efficient on slots and skills there. I think, yeah, potentially most of your list should be taking Layla as well as Laxmi. And then Rahuni, the super doctor. He is a bit awkward. He's a bit of an awkward fit in Qapu Khalqi, just where he doesn't provide any kind of bonus. But if you're taking something like Janiseries, you can stick him in there as a very good doctor because Janiseries don't have that cube. He's quite likely to get them back up. And he's a nice little piece. He's a piece you'll also put in sort of more utility Harrises, where no one's getting a bonus, but you've got a lot of good stuff going on in there. But I would say probably not taken as highly as he may be in other factions, but still quite good where he fits in. Alright, next up Fiddler, who is weirdly important for Qapu Khalqi for a couple reasons, and those reasons differ based on her profiles. So the super jump profile, it's quite important just on the basis of Qapu Khalqi not having a fast specialist. So aside from Fiddler and Samsa. So suddenly if you go from having everyone just being 4-4, as you've been seeing a lot of, to suddenly have a unit who's moving 8-4, who's quite a good specialist, suddenly that's a big game changer. Fiddler, she's also pretty decent at handling herself with a contender +1 burst as well. And also not bad in CC. So fast specialist with some close assault capability is something that Qapu Khalqi really, really appreciates. But if you want to go more into that close assault capacity, that's when you come down to the climbing plus profiles with jackbots, who really, with that Vulcan shotgun and explosive, kind of really hit one of your better options in terms of trying to affect some kind of close assault, aside from Bashi bazooks, who we'll talk about in a second. So Fiddler, she she varies depending on what faction she's in, and I think Qapu Khalqi is one of the factions she's a higher pick in than in others. If you were to say take, Rama doesn't really necessarily want or need Fiddler, but Qapu Khalqi really, really does. Next up, the Bashis. So the Bashis are Hollow Mask and Hollow Projector parachutists, not combat drops, so they don't have the super jump either, which is a bit of a shame. But what they do bring is essentially a big bucket of murder. I've played a lot with kind of the various different kinds of Bashi bazooks, but they're sort of one of the ways you get a close assault is with a Bashi bazook. And they're also really good for doing things like clearing minefields as well, with that hollow projector, which is really, really nice. And having that surprise attack neg 3 just on that first shot can make all the difference. So I really prefer the two essentially just murder profiles, which is the T2 boarding shotgun and AP boarding pistols with a +1 burst. So this boarding pistol is absolutely brutal. What it is it's 3+7 AP templates. So that's likely to give anyone a bit of a run for their money. The boarding shotgun's extremely deadly as well, having that T2 ammo. And that's pretty similar to the +1 burst contender, where usually you're shooting someone in the back with a Bashi. So I usually go more for the T2 boarding shotgun, just because I like to be in there and getting that close assault off. Also having AP on the boarding pistols is incredible. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of the specialist profiles. I quite like the EM mine profile and the breaker rifle profile. I just think for the role I take them in, which is really close aggressive assault, which QK lacks, I'm really looking at these two. But the Bashis wasn't really sure how they'd perform kind of at the start of N5, but they've been monstrous. You can check out my recent tournament report to see how the Bashis did. I took a Bashi in every single round of that 5-round event, and they were fantastic. Next up, Warcores. You're not really going to take them much in QK. You have Yuan Yuans, you have Bashi Bazooks. You can't really afford to be wasting irregular slots on a Warcore, and everything's sort of cheap enough to where you really shouldn't need a Warcore either. We'll move on quickly to the Druze shock teams. Now, in any other faction, these guys would be absolutely fantastic on the back of X-Visor pictures. Now, with Laxmi picking up pictures, and Druze actually being somewhat below par in terms of hacking in Qapu Khalqi, where we've got Whip 14 killer hackers with inbuilt firewalls, or with surprise attack, Druze sort of aren't nearly as good as they used to be, partially just on how annoying it is to get a link bonus on them. So the killer hacking device with the picture, that's really the one you want to be looking at. And your options are either to pick up Arslan, who's not as terrible as he used to be, but still probably not ideal. Maybe you look at one of the grenade launcher profiles, as that's still something interesting in a different sort of attack vector and way Qapu Khalqi can do that. An interesting thing may be, you could spotlight a unit and then spec fire it. It's sort of a weird off-guided strategy if you don't want to bring a guided bot. But then there's also just the shock marksman rifle, who's really not awful. It's sort of a last minute kind of turn 3 unit to push with. Kind of a -1 burst Spitfire, if you would. It's really not awful. But again, my preference is to get a Burkut light rocket launcher and a Hafza to kind of be able to move up the board and get those X-Visor pictures down with the killer hacking device. But compared to other factions that do have Druze, Qapu Khalqi isn't necessarily as high on them as you might think. And that's mainly to do with Laxmi being much more linkable and having pictures as well. But Druze, still quite good. Next up, the Djanbazans. Now these units are really quite nice, despite their BS12, due to having that MSV level 2. And Warhorse is a really nice defensive skill these days as well, where a lot of BS attack neg 3 is around on some of the more popular units in the game at the moment. Them being shock immune with regen and arm 3 also means that sometimes they can kind of go up and down. I had a game where my opponent knocked down a Djanbazan 3 times, and he was able to get back up 3 times with that regen. So here I'm really interested in the AP sniper rifle and the heavy machine gun, and I usually just run these guys as a duo. Just have that AP sniper rifle up in ARO, and then the heavy machine gun for the active turn as well. There are a few other profiles of note though, and having a pure Haris team of Djanbazans is nice, because it means they're discover shooting camo markers really, really well. So having a Warhorse hacker, it is a bit expensive, but it's nice to have. It's also a good thing to pretend to be with a Hafza as well. You've also got the Doctor who's bleh. I mean, you've got regen, you can take a bit of Doctor elsewhere. The Red Fury is okay again if you're low on SWIC, but you sort of shouldn't be. And that's the same with the Shock Marksman. But really, I'm running the HMG as an active gun, the AP Sniper as an ARO piece. They're in a pure duo, and you can slap something on the end of that if you want to. You can slap Laxmi on the end just to give special dot at the picture, or you can slap a Hafsa on the end to kind of bluff a Warhorse hacker. There's a lot you can do there. So next up is the Sekban, and they're very simple in a sense. They're BS13 with NCO, and that's sort of what they're known for. The most popular profiles, I'd say, is the Doctor with the boarding shotgun, the Spitfire, and then the heavy rocket launcher. But I think these guys are slightly overshadowed, but they do link pretty nicely. And I'd say really I'm just looking at the boarding shotgun, Doctor +3, who's sort of just similarly as good as Rahuni, but gives NCO and gives a keyword, links a little bit better. The heavy rocket launcher and Spitfire are fine, but if you're looking for a cheap either of those, I'd really be looking into a different unit. But the NCO is quite nice, as in Qapu Khalqi, you're usually not using the LT order. So next up, Security Chief Arslan, an unfortunate unit in the sense of, no winding cap, but no shock immune. But he's got a niche with the Disco Baller, which is something you otherwise don't have. Not that you necessarily need it because you've got smoke and white noise. So I generally avoid Arslan. He's not unplayable by any means. And he's a unit I considered in the most recent tournament I went to, just because there was a custom mission that wanted you to have an LT who could run around a bit. But ultimately, Security Chief Arslan, not really a unit you're going to go to for a normal mission or normal mission setup. On the other hand, Freelance Operator Samsa is another really, really important piece to Qapu Khalqi. Again, just on the back of being 6'2 with super jump, which means he's quite fast. He's also quite deadly as well. A plasma rifle with Mimneg 3 and surprise attack on the first shot. It's really quite good. Plasma is a very brutal ammo type, and him starting halfway up the board is a big positive as well. So Samsa, he's a unit I'd be taking quite highly. He's not an auto pick. Sometimes you just don't need the speed, but he's one to be looking at quite often when building lists. Whether you need a killer or a specialist, he does both quite well. And he's really the only unit in the faction who starts up the board, who is also capable of taking some heads as well. And now, speaking of units I would preference, if you're wanting cheap Swick weapons, this is sort of where the Kaplans fit in over the Sekbans. Though the Sekban does have BS-13, I'd really be preferencing the Kaplans as they do of that MIM -3. And really here I'm liking the heavy rocket launcher and the Spitfire. Just purely on their price point. If you're wanting a good gun in Qapu Khalqi, those really kind of start at about the 30-point mark, where you're getting into your heavy infantry, where you're getting into units like Janiseries, Azra'ils, Burkuts. They're where your very good guns are at. And the Sekban, it's okay, it's fine, just being BS-13 no mods, but I really do prefer having the BS-12. Now, the heavy rocket launcher light shotgun, it's only 20 points. It's a very flexible piece that you can either use on ARO if you think you need that extra gun up, or you can use an active, where we've seen sort of multispectral visors go down a bit in popularity, as I may have discussed in previous videos. But look, the Spitfire is also quite good just as a weapon to push with, because outside of, say, Fiddler with her Contenders or Samsa, you don't necessarily have units that want to get into those mid-ranges and move up the board. And you can sort of build QK lists that sort of never want to leave their DZ, and that can present its own challenges. But the Kaplan is a unit who very much is happy to get out there and move. So the Kaplan is a bit of a niche unit, but that's where I think it fits in as a cheap gun over the Sekban. So yeah, look, I don't mind the Kaplan at all. I used to have a pretty down opinion of them, but after putting them on the table a couple times and putting them in lists and kind of how they fit into list building, they sort of make a lot of sense as sort of a place to be in the faction. Often I'll be making a Haris team, where I just take my Kaplan of choice, and then 2 units who share a keyword in the wildcard section, whether that be, Layla and Hafza, or Laxmi and a Hafza, or anything along those lines. They fit in pretty decent. So now we get to our HI. And our HI is really where kind of that kind of higher standard of gunfighting in Qapu Khalqi can be seen. So we start with the Janissary, who's got BS attack neg 3 and just 14s across the board in terms of stats. BS 14, Fizz 14, Whip 14, and 2 wounds is a very nice little guy to run around and cause some havoc with. And really he's got two profiles I'm drawn to, which are the heavy machine gun, who's just a great active primary gun. I mean, if you just read the stats of the Janissary, he looks like a Pano unit. He just shoots that good. And then also the missile launcher. Now the missile launcher, not just as an ARO piece, but can also be used in an active capacity in a pinch as well. He's got enough stats to pull it off, and enough kind of tankiness behind him that if it goes wrong, he probably won't suffer too badly. And you can also make bigger teams of Janissaries because of those Hafza keywords as well. So you can take something like Janissary Missile Launcher, Janissary HMG, two Hafzas, and say Laxmi, and that's a very robust and very deadly fire team. Next up in terms of main guns, you've then got the Azra'il, who is an absolute man-melter, held back by just being BS-13 no mods. You've got the AP Heavy Machine Gun, who is, I'd say, the preferential unit if you're just wanting an active gun. Essentially, with the Azra'il, you really just need one shot to land, and then be able to burn out from there. And having an extra 2 burst over the Feuerbach, if you're linked up, is really valuable. But you can also link up the Feuerbach, and then that's a burst for Feuerbach, as the Azra'il has BS attack +1 burst on that profile, which also means a burst potentially for heavy pistol, and a true burst to chain rifle. That's very deadly. So, and really, I take the Feuerbach quite a lot. If I'm also wanting kind of an off ARO piece, he really excels at that. 5 armor is really quite hefty. And again, if you can land one of those Feuerbach shots, you're likely to melt to the ground whatever you've hit, which is really, really nice. So the Azra'il, a very nice and a pretty key unit as your main sort of armor busting weapon. The Azra'il's very much a go-to in that respect. So the Azra'il and the Janiseries, there really are two main guns outside of getting into your tags, but you do have some other heavy infantry that are more in sort of a support section. The first one of these is the Burkut, who's a Mimneg 3 no-ending cap engineer, and I really do like the light rocket launcher, +1 damage. As we discussed, Qapu Khalqi doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of pieces that want to push up into the board, but one really nice little duo that I'm a big fan of is a Burkut light rocket launcher in a pure duo with a Sekban Doctor. The Burkut can keep taking fights. If something goes bad, he can get patched up. And having that submachine gun is very nice as well, because it means he can just sort of come around the corner on something and spray something down with 4 SMG shots. There are some kind of other profiles that are good as well, quite like the boarding shotgun +1 burst and Panzerfaust is quite nice, as is the SMG and +1 burst heavy flamethrower. But you are spending almost 30 points per unit on those, which I don't quite think is worth it. So really, if you're taking the Burkut, I really, really like the light rocket launcher, but not necessarily many of the others. There's still good profiles to disguise Hafza as, quite a lot as well, because Hafza and Burkut both have the Sekban keyword. They can give bonuses together, but the non-light rocket launchers are just a bit expensive. Engineer is a really nice skill, though. You can sort of deploy one near one of your TR bots if you're going second, and sort of pick up that TR bot on your way out. It's a nice little incidental thing to have. And you can also kind of, put one in a team with a Rafiq, or in a team with one of your tags. That's where you might look at kind of the more close assaulty ones, if you're gluing one of these to a tag. But otherwise, I do really like the light rocket launcher. Then last up, the Mobile Regatta. So these guys, they don't link, is the big shame, and you're not really wanting any of these profiles, really, except for the Tinbot Neg 6 hacker, who's a very nice thing for the Hafza to disguise as, and occasionally just to put in a list. I think if you're wanting to run a guided strategy, Mobile Regatta Tinbot hacker is not a bad idea, just on the basis of having a very resilient hacker to ensure that your opponent can't essentially scalpel you out of your own strategy just by killing your squishy 1 wound no armor hackers. So if you're running kind of a more dedicated guided plan, which Qapu Khalqi can absolutely do with pictures from Laxmi and Druze, the Mo Regatta are a really great pick there. So getting into your tags, first up we have the Iguana Squadron, who is, yeah, he's easily your best tag in Qapu Khalqi, and I think Qapu Khalqi is really his natural home. In Corregidor, the Swick spend is just too much for a model who can also take some ARO duties, but the Iguana here is really quite nice. It's a tag that's very, very hard to hack, and you can also put Fairy Dust on it with Laxmi as well, because she is that upgrade. So suddenly you can have a tag that's neg 6 to hack, and has a repeater on it as well. Now, this is structure 4 with no winning cap, but is an escape system tag, meaning the pilot pops out after the Iguana takes 3 wounds, but the pilot does carry over any wounds and any states taken. And there has been a time where my Iguana has been hit by some weapons and it's just gone all the way down just straight to dead, and in that instance the operator doesn't pop out either. So it's an AP heavy machine gun with BS-14, so it's your other really nice anti-armor gun next to the Azra'il. It's got a heavy flamethrower +1 burst, which is quite nice, but then the main draw is the shock mines. Now the shock mines are a great little piece. One thing that tags can struggle with is if your opponent's null deployed, and they're just sort of, there's group 2, there's the tag, it has all the orders, you can sort of just not really have too much to do with it. But with the Iguana Squadron's mine dispensers, you can just be shooting mines all over the place defensively, or offensively. You can shoot out some mines before you round a corner to have them go off and really not be kind. The Iguana Operator has Specialist Operative, but it's important to note that you cannot choose to eject the pilot like you did in N4, so the Iguana really has no specialist capacity until it's taken a certain amount of damage. And I have played a couple games where I've tried to suicide the Iguana, so it takes wounds and becomes a specialist. But really, when you're looking at the Iguana in this way, he's one of the better tags to put in a duo of some kind, just so you can have that specialist go with you. I really like taking Layla Sharif, who can use that repeater, as can Laxmi to put that white noise straight through it, and kind of throw out pitchers in the midfield, though I'd probably rather her be back with a special die somewhere. Or a Burkut, who can just escort it as an engineer, and also do that bit of close assault. The Iguana, it's quite a good tag. Then the Shikush, who is unfortunately just in a bit of an awkward position of the heavy machine gun sort of just being the continuous HMG very much being overshadowed by the Azra'il, who has an AP continuous heavy machine gun. So it's not one you're going to see very much at all. The AP Spitfire is interesting, but if you want to take an AP Spitfire on a tag, that's really more where Scarface comes in. Now Scarface brings along Cordelia, who's a nice little engineer, and taking Cordelia used to be kind of a liability because she didn't have a turret option when turrets could be reloaded, but now that they can't be reloaded, she's actually quite a nice little piece. Comes with Mim, a combi rifle, and a boarding pistol, so if she gets attacked, she can actually do something about it. And Scarface can just stomp around and be merry. So the main thing with Scarface is he's only BS-13, but he sort of makes up for it with a bit of close assault capacity. In terms of what profiles I like all of them, honestly. I've done extensive testing with all of them. They all have their place. The Mach 12 and Heavy Rocket Launcher is a very kind of holistic assault unit who can stab someone from, 32 inches up to 0 inches. Scarface can do something about it. The AP HMG, I would say, is somewhat overshadowed by the Azra'il again, but it's still a fun little piece to rock around with. But really the AP HMG is more for factions like Druze and Ikari who don't have that ranged AP. But then if you're thinking of taking the Shikush for the AP Spitfire, I'd much rather be taking Scarface, who's got a +1 burst AP Spitfire, and kind of all of this up here. If you're taking Scarface, I'd really look at taking the pilot, just to give Scarface a dodge of a 14, because he does actually really appreciate that dodge. Otherwise, he's got Berserk +3, which is really nice. You're not berserking into any CC specialists, but a 10-inch berserk on a 25 with a +4 DACC weapon is quite nice. And of course, him being able to shit out his little turtle mech to kind of go do uh, objectives upfield where he's running anyway is quite a nice capability. Then trip hammers. Um, I mean, they've sort of got a place, kind of like they do in Druze, where you can just take the AP Spitfires or the heavy shotguns and just run them into people. I think usually I would rather take Scarface, but you can also pure duo the trip hammers as well, which is somewhat funny. But really, again, I'd be looking more to Scarface for their role. Rafik remotes you can link only the Red Fury. A sensor is actually quite nice in Qapu Khalqi, where you don't necessarily want to walk into a camo field like other uh, armies can. But yeah, the Rafik it's got a better home elsewhere, mainly in Rama, I think, because here it's not really doing it. Now, one special thing is you get two Shabib remotes in Qapu Khalqi, as I mentioned, and I think, as I said before, taking two Shabib remotes and some kind of engineer makes a very easy plug and play ARO setup with a Djanbazan sniper, and can really be more of a hassle than your opponent anticipates, as they're a unit who is very unlikely just to get blown off the board, and you can sort of just pick them up after they go down, and you're pretty happy with that. Uh, the HMG you actually do sometimes take in Qapu Khalqi, just because you have the leftover Swick, and it's, again, you don't mind putting marksmanship on a HMG remote in Qapu Khalqi, but it's sort of kind of a background sort of strategy. You're mainly taking these two Thunderbolts and an Engineer, and you're feeling really good about it. Yeah, guided remote. You can do a very good guided in Qapu Khalqi. You've got the pictures, you've got the whip, you'll have a great time. Three Fanus remotes is really nice. You don't really tend to need them as much in N5 as you maybe did in N4, where stuff is sort of cheap enough now to where you don't really feel the need to take three all the time. But you absolutely can if you're going very heavy on heavy infantry. The Fanuses can be really nice as repeaters and orders as well. Helper bot's a helper bot, and I would call this a baggage faction. Uh, you've got the Iguana, who's got the mines. You've got Laxmi and Druze, who've got the pitchers. And yeah, they really don't mind having baggage around at all. An Evo Hacker is very nice, just to help out your Yuan Yuans, which we'll talk about in a second, your drop troops. But it's not something you'll take every time. But the baggage is always quite nice. Then the Al Hawa. These guys are really quite good as a very cheap little piece. Mostly I'm looking at the killer hacking device, just being Whip 14 with surprise attack with Trinity, being a very good hacker. And also having cyber mines and a boarding shotgun kind of offsets that BS11 a little bit. The mine layers are funny, especially the grenade launcher. I remember a slow grow I took I think three Al Hawa mine layers and just coordinated grenade launches, and that was pretty fun. But otherwise, yeah, look, you're really looking at the killer hacking device. You can take the regular hacker and the FO as well. And yeah, I don't know. The mine layers are kind of funny. I don't think they're necessarily as good as they used to be, but you can absolutely take them. They're a good unit to put on suppressors somewhere if you really need that defensive equity. Then Yuan Yuans, the heroes of the faction. I really like taking the heavy pistol one, personally, but that is very much personal taste. You may prefer the DACC weapon, but these guys are absolutely vital to your game plan. I'd say you're probably taking at least two of these in every Qapu Khalqi list, and potentially the full three. I have run the full three before, where you can start two on the ground and one in the air, and that's a pretty nice combination. But usually you are starting these guys in your DZ just to help you provide smoke, sort of similar to how they function in JSA Oban. If you've played Oban or played against Oban, that'll give you a pretty good idea of how the Yuan Yuans sort of behave in Qapu Khalqi lists. Uh, you really do want to stay away from these two profiles. I mean, the boarding shotgun's bleh, but you're never wanting to take this rifle. these two profiles are really the ones you're going to want to take. And then the last unit in our list, the Zabak Arrow unit, an Albedo 6 BS-12 Spitfire smoke grenade launcher, who you will never take. Albedo just isn't as universal a modifier as something like Mimetism or BS Attack Neg 3, and you have white noise. So you really don't need to take the Zabak. It does kind of pop into the operator, which ironically makes it better at shooting because suddenly it can take cover. But yeah, again, unless you're just having a bit of a fuck around, I really wouldn't be looking at the Zabak. So let's now take a look at a couple of example lists for Qapu Khalqi. On the left here, one that's sensible, and on the right, one that's slightly less sensible, but still a lot of fun. So on the left here, this is kind of a very generic Qapu Khalqi list of a mix of units I generally really like to take. So first up, we've got the Bashi Bazook with that T2 boarding shotgun and AP boarding pistols. Really nice units. It's done quite a lot for me, and you can take a look at the tournament report posted a few weeks ago to have a look at some of the work it's done for me there. But it really shores up that close assault. You've got those triple AP templates, and having that hollow mask and hollow echo can really lead to some lines of play that you wouldn't otherwise get with other drop troops. Next up, we've got our Haris team of Azra'il APHMG, Hafza Lieutenant, and Laxmi, where in this link I'll usually be masking the Hafza as a Mobile Regatta Tinbot hacker, but if you're coming up against someone who maybe knows Qapu Khalqi a little bit better, you could put in a Janissary with a Tinbot, or even an Odalisque, something like that. And this team really, they can handle sort of shorter arrows a bit closer to your DZ, not a main arrow piece because it's not the Feuerbach on the Azra'il, but they're your main sort of active turn killers, long-range killers with the Azra'il. Having Laxmi in the team means that you can slap white noise directly on the Azra'il before it stands up or takes a corner against an MSV or marksman unit, and altogether it's a pretty effective little Haris team. Next up, Samsa. Again, just a monster. Your fast specialist and fast killer as well. He's really, really great. And then you've got two Yuan Yuans. I like putting one in each group just so that if you need smoke, you can get it from either group, no matter what position you're in. Maybe you're shooting with your Djanbazans in group 1 and need those extra orders to be shooting, so you throw it in the smoke from group 1. Or maybe, your Azrael's doing a lot, so you want to get smoke from your group 2. So Yuan Yuan's both really good. Again, my preference is the 6-point heavy pistol, but to each their own. Then we've got another Haris team of a Berkut SMG light rocket launcher, a Druze killer hacker with those beautiful X-Visor pictures, and a Hafza. This is one of the cheaper and more effective ways to get a special die on a Druze. The Berkut's quite a good gun, who's more than happy to push up into the midfield, which is something you lack, and can take a hit himself. With the submachine gun and light rocket launcher, he can pretty effectively engage things like skirmishers in the midfield as well, having that burst force submachine gun or light rocket launcher if they're just that little bit further out. Usually in this team, you can disguise the Hafsa as either a second Druze hacker is a nice way to do it, or potentially an engineer or a second Berkut is a good way to go as well. But I usually like to set it up as either a second Berkut or a second Druze killer hacker, where, let's say your main killer hacker there goes up, gets line, throws a picture down. You say, yep, I'm going to try and hack you. Your opponent goes, okay, well, I'll just try and blast the brain of the other Druze hacker. You go, okay, beautiful, your action's failed. I'm getting a free not face-to-face killer hack here. So that's a nice little maneuver you can pull there. And then group 2, you've got the Djanbazan duo, where we've stuck Layla Sharif onto the end. And you can see now we've got our core with the Azra'il, just a 3-man team. We've got our second Haris team with the Berkut, and now a third Haris team with the Djanbazan. So that's where that extra Haris team, even though it's very duo-focused in this current meta, is quite nice. So got those two Djanbazans. We're going to be sticking that AP sniper up on Aira, and then have that HMG for the active turn. And Layla's just there as a specialist to move up with the HMG in the event that you just need someone to make a move there. Layla's also nice as kind of a secondary hacker, where group 1 you've got a regular hacker and a killer hacker. Then group 2 you've got that sort of combined hacker, where you can again be very efficient with where you're spending your orders. We've got a baggage bot there just to be reloading the Druze and Laxmi. We've got a guided bot because this list can do a guided strategy quite well, and then just a Yuan Yuan to round it out. So in this list, we've got a lot of vectors of attack. We've got the Bashi Bazook, we've got Samsa, we've got the Azra'il, the Djanbazan, we've got the Burkut to move out the midfield, and we've got the missile bot as well. So no matter where your opponent is or how they've set up their defenses, you're going to have a way in with this list. And for me, that's what Qapu Khalqi is really all about. Similar to Corregidor, is having all those great attack vectors. So let's flip over to our second list here, which is, as I said, less reasonable. It is a double tag list with Scarface and the Iguana. So one thing I think Qapu Khalqi is quite good at is supporting tags. So let's take a look at what I've cooked up here. So we've got Scarface and Cordelia, and we've given Scarface loadout Gamma with the +1 burst AP Spitfire and Panzerfaust, and Cordelia we've taken with a Nazmat. So they're not going to be in a duo. This is so that Cordelia can drop its little bot, and even if you did want them to be in a duo, you'd need to take a different Scarface. One thing you could do if the Iguana and Scarface were in the same group is you could duo Cordelia with an Iguana, which is interesting. But here, she's going to be playing more of a backfield support role, so we've given her a Nazmat. We've got a Shabib remote that Cordelia will be hanging out next to, while the little bot runs around helping the tanks. Then we've got a Haris team of a Djanbazan sniper, a Hafza lieutenant, and Laxmi, and the Djanbazan can be used as an active and reactive, or just active piece, depending on your matchup. If you take a look at the Albedo and MSV video from earlier, you'll be able to get a better idea of when to stick him up and when not to. Then we've got a Group 1 and Group 2 6-point Yuan Yuan, who are going to start on the ground. But that 7-point Yuan Yuan, we're going to start up in the air to combat drop or parachutist in during the game. Then we've got a Shakush pilot, just because Scarface, as a very much a forward assaulting tag, really does appreciate that +3 to his dodge. Then Group 2, we've got the Iguana for a heavy fire support in a pure duo. Sorry. Then in Group 2, we've got that Iguana in a duo with Layla Sharif, where the Iguana itself isn't natively a specialist, and you have to wait for that little pilot to pop out, where here, the Iguana can drag around Layla to press buttons, and also to use the Iguana's repeater as well, which is quite interesting. Then we've got the Camille, 2 Fanus bots just to round out orders, and that Yuan Yuan from earlier. So, those are 2 Qapu Khalqi lists, one to get you started, and one just to have a bit of fun with. So let's look at a buying guide. If you want to get into Qapu Khalqi, what should you be buying? Well, the best box for this is the new Reinforcements Alpha box with Qapu Khalqi. That comes with a lot of units that are really quite good to use and also to mask as. There is an old Qapu Khalqi starter box, but that comes with a lot of Hafza, who ironically, while they're in a lot of lists, they're not on the table very often. So the Reinforcements Alpha box is a great place to start. Next up, I'd be grabbing 2 or 3 Yuan Yuan blisters. You're running 2 Yuan Yuans most of the time, sometimes 3, so those are definitely your next buy. After that, I'd be picking up a box of Djanbazan. They can be a little bit hard to find. Alternatively, if you can't find any boxes of Djanbazan out there, find another Haqqislam medium infantry you like the look of, and that'll do just fine. There are some pretty cool profiles with the Djanbazan aside from the Sniper and the HMG. The Red Fury, Shock Marksman, and Hacker are all relatively usable, in my opinion. Next up, there's a standalone blister for the Azra'il, who's a really good pickup as well, just to put that extra bit of oomph and firepower in your list. And then finally, the Reinforcements beta box comes with Layla Sharif, comes with Rahuni, and the Hakim, who you can proxy as a Bashi Bazook. The Hakim is a really, really nice sculpt. So, I hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you did, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.